Tyler, and all the many roles that we play. So I'm the board president of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. I am also a board member of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. I'm a co-founder of the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, and I work very closely with Black farmers here in Detroit, broadly speaking, Michigan as well, and also in the Mid-Atlantic, specifically around my hometown of Philadelphia in Maryland. And I'm a member of the Black Dirt Farm Collective, which is a collective of Black agrarians in the Mid-Atlantic. And I also work with Black farmers in the Deep South as well. So I really consider this work to be a commitment to abolition and decolonization that intersects with climate justice and all of the things: economic justice, environmental justice, food, of course, justice and sovereignty, that are really needed solutions and responses to systemic oppressions that we fight against on a daily basis. I'm also a mother, my most important role. And I see some box people in the audience. Peace. So yeah, it's an honor to be with you all today, and I'm hoping that we can learn together, because I'm definitely not the expert on any of this. I've spent a lot of time studying this topic, but there's always more to learn. So just want to lift up that we all have something to contribute, and the chat is open if you want to edit something, I would say, or just contribute something on the topic.
Okay. I went ahead and made you co-host. If you wanted to, you can start sharing when you're ready. Oh, you're muted right now.
Okay.
Boom.
So let me know if you can see. Can y'all see? Good. Hear me good? Okay. All right. So like I said, so I'm going to be presenting on the history of Black agrarianism and broadly speaking, Black farmers in Detroit and beyond. And I'm hoping that this can be more of a conversation than a lecture. I would definitely prefer to be in dialogue with people as opposed to having to speak as an expert on something that I am not. So just gonna pull up my notes here. Okay. So before we start, I just wanted to get a sense of who are you in the audience. If you're an educator or a researcher or a parent or a gardener, a land steward, just trying to get a sense of who's in the room so I can really speak to these identity issues that are very intersected with the topic. So you can type in the chat. The chat is open, right, T?
It is. Yep. And I'm monitoring.
Okay.
So we got some gardeners, master gardeners, horse farmer. Wow. Middle school teacher, student and gardener, parent and gardener. Got student, gardener and parent. Yep. Hey, Ashaki, parent and master gardener. We got Sam, he's a gardener and theater maker. I'd like to learn more about that. We got a retired educator, an avid gardener, special education teacher and gardener, a lot of gardeners, environmental studies grad, and volunteer at community gardeners, grower and grow space consultant, okay. Gardener teacher, natural dyer, textile grower, nice. Eternal student. I resonate with that one. Farm and farm to school educator, nice. Personal interests, okay. Landscaper, permaculturalist, conservationalist, volunteer, consumer. That's a good point. Researcher, gardener. Got parent. You got an attorney in the house. Parent, student, gardener, local food rep for a company. Nice. So glad you're joining us. Okay. Yeah, you got a lot of gardeners, you got a lot of parents, and you got some educators.
Wonderful.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is Greg, and I'm a gardener, try to be a permaculturalist and a beekeeper.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right. Thanks
Teacher and gardener.
for sharing about yourselves, folks. Yes, all of the hats that we wear. We have multiple we have multiple roles, multiple identities. All right, so that helps. I love to know who I'm talking to. So it builds the intimacy, and hopefully I can tailor their presentation to your lived experience. Okay, so I'm going to go through a brief history of colonial land dispossession and displacement. Bear with me, it is a little long because it's a lot to share, and it's very important information that I don't think many of us are aware of in terms of like the people's history of Black agrarianism and all of the intersecting topics. So starting in 1862, Congress passes the Homestead Act, accelerating Western migration by providing white settlers with 160 acres of public land. And of course, this is land taken from indigenous peoples, and the act led to the distribution of 80 million acres of public land by 1900. And then in 1865, after meeting with freed Africans in Savannah, Georgia, General William Sherman responded to their demands for land. And this became the Special Order 15, also known as 40 acres and a mule. And he issued this Special Order 15, setting aside a huge swath of abandoned lands along the Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida coast for Black families. And in the same year, 40,000 freed Africans were settled on some 400,000 acres of land in Georgia and South Carolina mainly. And later that summer, President Andrew Johnson reverses the policy and orders the land to be returned to the Confederate planter oligarchy. But it's essentially reversing or reneging. I was trying to think of a different word, but I'll just go with that for the sake of what's on my mind right now. Reneging what was owed to enslaved or formerly enslaved Africans for land independence. And then in 1865, the same year, Congress established the Freedmen's Bureau, providing for the redistribution of abandoned or confiscated lands to freedmen up to 40 acres. In reality, the Freedmen's Bureau never really controlled 0.2% of the land in the South. They really didn't have the power that they were intended to have, which was meant to be a land redistribution mechanism for newly freed African peoples. And in fact, unlike whites that were given free land in the West that was stolen from indigenous peoples, the 1862 Homestead Act required that Black people purchase their land. And this Homestead Act sort of facilitated white settlers receiving some of the most massive welfare subsidies of any people in the world in the 19th century. And so we see how this plays out today, why there are such vast wealth disparities, because basically white people, white settlers in particular, in the West and the South were given free land, while Black people who worked the land for centuries were required to purchase it, which is a really ludicrous idea. And so to move on, the 1866 Southern Homestead Act opened up 46 million acres of public land in the states of Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And severe opposition to Black land ownership in the South places obstacles in the path of Black farmers on the state level. And within 10 years, in June 1876, the act was repealed by Congress. And in spite of the neglect, hostility, and government-sanctioned racial violence towards Black people, by 1910, Black people in Southern states had acquired over 15 million acres of farmland. and controlled 218 farms. And they did this through cooperativism, through pooling their resources together and collectively purchasing land as a way to beat the capitalist system at its own game. And then from 1950 to 1975, over 500,000 African-American farms went under, leaving only 45,000. And in the 1960s, the Black farm count in the 10 southern states fell from 132,000 to 16,000, which was an 88% decline, which has led to our approximate totaling of Black farmers of 2% of all US farmers owning less than 3 million acres of farmland, or less than 4.5 million acres of farmland. And so this history really outlines how Black people have systemically been cut off from land acquisition systems, very intentionally and very, very brilliantly, actually, by the colonial order, and has maintained us as laborers and renters, while our labor and our intellectual knowledge continues to be exploited to build up the empire that we know today.
Hey, Shakira, someone in the chat asked what sparked that decline that you mentioned?
Oh, so I'm going to actually get to that in a few slides. And so to be brief, there was a lot of factors that went into Black land loss, racial discrimination at the hands of the federal government, the lack of representation on county agricultural committees, of course, the migrations due to the racial violence that Black people were experiencing in the South, Jim Crow laws, et cetera. So I have a slide that actually depicts a lot of these components and how they interact together. So
okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So from 1910 to 2017, there was an overall percentage loss of 96% of Black farm operators compared to a 64% loss of white farm operators. And from 1910 to 2017, you can also see a very similar outlay where Black farm acres are not even on the scale of white farm acres. So there's a drastic decline in the number of farm operators and the number of acres owned between Black and white people.
This is astonishing, this graph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And this is why we say that, well, it's no secret that white farm ownership, white people own 98% of the farmland in the United States. I mean, just flat off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very strategic, again, endeavor to keep Black people oppressed, because without land ownership, there's not much you can do in other avenues of independence and autonomy.
Yeah, Aaron and Dajanab in the chat are like, whoa, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those numbers are staggering. And then for the folks who are on the call who may not be farmers, we know that farmers, their wealth is their land, and so this is really showing the disparities in wealth in America, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there was an overall percentage loss of 74% of Black farm acres compared to an almost 2% gain of white farm acres during this time period.
Mm-hmm. Ruth was asking if you could just show that last graph one more time, the farm operator graph.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Right. And also I want to emphasize here, you see in the lower left-hand corner, the number of Black farm operators peaked in 1920 due to our cooperative work and responsibility. Like there was no way that we could have attained as many acres and attained as many Black farm businesses as we could have during that time period without pooling our resources together. And so it's kind of ironic that we had more we owned more land and there were more Black farm operators, owners and workers back then than there are today. So let that marinate, right? Like that's
Mhm.
really astonishing.
Did that cooperative ownership mostly happen in the South, Shakira?
So a lot of the history that outlines that process focuses on the South, but I'm sure it happened other places as well, because again, that was our tool of economic survival. There was no way that we could compete with the capitalist system on our own. So we had to pull resources together. It had to be collective and community endeavors. And so I think that the history is being slowly unraveled in terms of what has happened in the North and the Midwest and the West, but majority of the literature that talks about this history is rooted in the South.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we can talk about that later on in the presentation as well. So the civil rights era is usually cited as a significant period of political, economical, and overall societal advancement for Black communities. While this is true, it is also important to emphasize how Black farmers continued to lose enormous amounts of land at that time, specifically during the Brown versus Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and other legislation that was supposed to be advantageous to Black communities. And this is very ironic given that there would have been no civil rights movement without Black farmers who often used their land to bail activists out of jail and to provide security, housing, and food for traveling activists such as the Freedom Riders. And so the goal of me illuminating this particular factor is to basically emphasize the contradictions and how many liberals talk about the civil rights era as this shining light in American history. Arguably it was, and still it was very detrimental to Black agrarian communities who didn't see or reap the benefits that were intended from that movement as they should have.
Mhm. Mhm.
So this is a very basic slide of the various factors that have contributed to Black land loss. And so we can see that the intersectional political economic forces work together very, very strategically and very diabolically, such as air property conflicts. Air property is when land is passed down through generations. If a family member transitions and they don't have a will, that property is now air property that can be transferred to descendants. And because of the legalities of the system and all of the loopholes and white supremacist racial capitalism and all these things,
Mhm.
air property is very, very political and very complicated. So it's hard for heirs to the land to prove that they can or they have rights to the land, because the system works very hard to steal land from Black people, as we know. And so air property conflicts is one of the most pervasive factors that have contributed to Black land loss for decades. Because we know that many Black people choose to not use wills and other legal forms of documentation because that traditionally has not worked in our favor since the Emancipation Proclamation, even before then. Also, lack of trustworthy and affordable legal services, the federal and private lending agencies' non-responsive attitude for loan requests. We know that through the Pickford versus Glickman class action lawsuit, that was the largest civil rights lawsuit in federal history, talks about how Black farmers were denied loans, small and medium and large loans, at the same rate or in the same situations that white farmers were granted loans in the same counties, in the same states, under the same circumstances, but because they were Black, they were denied farm loans that they needed to keep their farms going. And we all know about the massive rural to urban outmigrations. Again, this was not, the story goes that there were jobs in the North, and so Black people left the land in the South to follow the economic opportunities in the North, which again is arguably valid. However, what is often left out of that narrative is how the racial violence, the racial terrorism, the white terrorism that was embedded in the land theft from Black people drove people to the North. So it just wasn't following economic opportunities. It was a departure or the need to run from the white terrorism in the South that really, really, really facilitated this multi-decade out-migration from the South. And then systemic discrimination in USDA programs, conservation programs, farm finance programs, I mean, just the gamut.
Yeah.
And then lack of representation on county ag committees and the domination of the industrial ag paradigm where it's get big or get out. And we know that many Black farmers are traditionally smaller farmers who cannot compete with large industrial farms. And so the domination of industrial ag has pushed out white and Black farmers, but because Black farmers tend to be smaller with less resources, it hit us harder.
That's a really good point. And I think it was Camille brought up the Justice for Black Farmers Act that Cory Booker put out last month, month or two ago now. And a lot of these are specifically, a lot of your rationale here is specifically addressing that act. So I don't know if we're going to talk about it later, but I just was noticing like the act specifically calls out heirs property issues. It specifically calls out the legal services and the discrimination in the USDA. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
There's multiple discussions that can be had. So maybe we can get to that in the Q&A.
Okay.
So the Great Migrations, again, are a really important part of Black agrarian history from the 1910s to the 1970s, during what is usually considered the Second Industrial Revolution. Millions of Black people migrated heavily to the urban North and West to escape the white terrorism of the rural and urban South. Employment in the North provided opportunities for thousands of Southern Blacks to escape Jim Crow, racial oppression, lynchings, and so forth. And many Southern African-American or Black migrants followed the rail lines and settled in major cities that included, of course, Detroit, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Washington, DC, and so on. And another thing I want to emphasize is that when we left the land in the South, we didn't leave those agricultural traditions behind. We brought them with us. And so Black people have always been growing food in the cities and the countries of the North prior to the Victory Gardens in response to World War II and during the 1940s. And before urban ag became such a popular or niche concept in the early 2000s, like this wasn't new for us. We grew food because we had to eat. Sometimes that was our only source of food consumption. And so it's important to understand how urban agriculture is really essentially building off of the legacy of Black people that migrated to from the South to the North due to reasons that I've already mentioned. And so we've been trailblazing this tradition of growing food in cities when it was sort of backwards thinking, where food is, only can be grown in the countryside.
Great point.
So this is another participatory slide. I'm curious, when did your family come to the D? And so this is a graph of the growing and declining Black population in Detroit for a little over a century. And so, and again, numbers are really tricky. When you pull from the Census of Agriculture or even just the US Census generally, we know that those systems are notoriously known to undercount Black people, which is a whole different conversation. However, they are the best statistics that we go with because there are no other really comprehensive numbers that we have currently. We don't have any other sources to rely on at this moment. So again, this graph is not as accurate as it could be for that reason. However, it's the best that we have to go with. So accept the numbers with grace, please.
People are popping in about when their family migrated up north. You got a wide array, and it's kind of cool that people know that history.
Nice. Wow. Yeah, really, really huge.
That's why I love when you say great migrations, because I think we always hear about it in, great migration like it was a one-time
Right.
thing.
Right. It happened over multiple decades.
Mhm.
Nice.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah, so these are really rich histories. When our families migrated here to Detroit throughout this time frame, again, we brought our agricultural knowledge with us. We brought agricultural tools with us. We brought family stories with us. And that's why they call Detroit one of the up South cities, sort of like Philadelphia and other cities, because there's such a rich connection between the deep Southern Black agrarian heritage and the now, Black Detroit population or Black Detroit culture, right? And so, yeah, this is really, really exciting to see.
Yeah, love it.
Okay. So this is a snapshot of farms in Michigan that is very similar to the national trend. However, on the state level, which I'll get to here, Black farmers comprise less than any other farm group. Like, we're not even on the scale. So in total, the Black farmers comprise 2% of US farm operators, according to the 2017 US Census, which is the most recent ag census in particular. And then here on the state level, we're not even on the scale. We comprise, based on the number calculation, we comprise 0% of farm operators in Michigan. And we see that on both levels, national and state, white people are in the majority, which is no coincidence.
Which is also disproportionate to their population, I would say. So
right.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, just to give a quick snapshot of Black farmers in Michigan, according to the data in the Ag Census of 2017, Black farmers have 238 farms at approximately 20,000 acres. We have 23%, we make 23% of us make less than $1,000 a year. 37% of us grow fruits and vegetables or specialty crops. 90% of us own our land. Kudos, whoop, whoop. 45% fall into the 10 to 49 acre range, and 84% are legal family or individual farms. So now I want to jump into the really detailed history of Detroit urban agriculture or Detroit agrarian processes, generally speaking. Starting with the early 18th century, and talk about how Black people have been connected to these various historical periods of time. So ribbon farms was the name given to the original land grants given by French colonist Antoine Cadillac in 1701. The lots were typically up to 200 feet wide and up to 3 miles in length, the narrow width being parallel with the Detroit River. The ribbon farm layout gave multiple landowners access to the waterways. And so river farm grants were free as long as the grantee agreed to fulfill certain rules and regulations, as it's considered to have been operated back then. And some of us might know the grantees based on the popular streets here in Detroit. Livernois, and I'm not a Detroiter, please forgive my pronunciation.
Hold on now.
I'm a Detroiter, but not a native Detroiter. Let me clarify. So I'm still learning certain pronunciation, so bear with me. St. Audubon, Shane Street, Michael Campo, Rio Pell, etc. The list goes on. And so a lot of these famous or popular streets in Detroit were named after people that owned these ribbon farms back then. And Hazen Pinnegree was the mayor of Detroit from 1889 to 1897. After an economic depression in 1893, he won public approval by opening empty lots to city farmers, and people called them Pingree's potato patches. And this is often recognized as the first urban agricultural program in the nation, and many other cities followed suit. And being 20 plus years after the Emancipation Proclamation and the pervasive practice of exploiting Black labor, these potato patches were more than likely worked by Black people for extremely low wages. And starting in 1931, during the Great Depression, the Detroit Thrift Gardens leased 300 acres of land, approximately 2,765 community gardens, and provided seeds to families in need for one growing season. And the program also provided seeds to over 1,000 or 1,600 actually home gardens. And thanks T for this slide, because I've never seen this before. So this is a really, really nice historical depiction of this, of the Detroit Thrift Gardens. So according to a survey, 8 out of 10 Detroiters over 60 years old said that their household maintained a family garden in the backyard or side lot. Again, we've always grown food where we had access when we migrated from the South to the North, out of necessity and out of the need to connect culturally and spiritually with our traditions. And I want to emphasize this wall here that was built along the, that was the cement wall to the right. It was constructed by a developer of an all-white subdivision around 1941 as a line of racial demarcation, keeping the burgeoning immigrant populations out. And so we know the famous 8 Mile Wall that is, how do I say this, meant to not only racially divide the city, but also keep the economic capital out of Detroit.
Mm-hmm. Also, can I mention one thing too? Because what I think what is super important for me when I'm thinking about, and you know, for some people on the call, this may be a controversial thing, but for me, I'm thinking about reparations, and I'm thinking about how to make the case for reparations, right? And when we think about these examples of federal discrimination, that is really the place where that is held for me. When we talked about the Homestead Act, we talked about the federal discrimination within the USDA loans that you mentioned, and then also this wall here that's right here in Detroit and is actually still up right on 8 Mile in Wyoming, is another example of how the Federal Housing Authority was giving more money to this is an example of a real life example of redlining, where the Federal Housing Authority was giving more money to folks who are developing in white neighborhoods, and this was to show that this neighborhood was not segregated, basically, that there was a clear demarcation. So the Federal Housing Authority would give those white developers money for that land. So it's just I think it's really important to note the distinction when the federal government is using its power and authority in a discriminatory way, because that is where, you know, that's where the line of, to me, reparations would come in, you know, is to repair that harm.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, which has been a practice since the dawn of the United States, quite frankly. Like, that's how it came into existence. They had to discriminate, and they had to keep us, or very keep society divided in a very explicit way in order to build capital for one population, or build wealth for one population, and using the labor of another population to do so. Like that's like the colonial recipe. Yeah, I'm with you, T. And that's
Yeah.
why we do the work that we do. We're going to get to you later. Okay. So the RNA is a really, one of my favorite examples of, and a really important point in our history as Black people, Black agrarians that have fought for our liberation and used the land as a tool in that. And the first thing the RNA did when it was founded here in Detroit in 1968, sought social independence through purchasing land in Mississippi to build an independent Black state along the Mississippi River to from Memphis to New Orleans. And in the name of Black nationalism, it was a priority to establish a land base for the Black community. They demanded reparations from the US government for the perpetual economic and violent crimes against African descendants, citing the international precedent of the 1952 Luxembourg reparations agreement, in which West Germany paid the new state of Israel over $8 million in reparations for crimes committed against Jewish Europeans during the Holocaust. Of course, the US government didn't buy it because of anti-Blackness and all these things. But yeah, that's another conversation. So upon successful negotiations with the US government, the RNA planned to use reparations to build an Ujamaa economy guided by the African socialism principles, cooperative economics, self-reliance, and so on. And we know that ultimately the land base that the RNA had built out was stolen or returned to the white settler population, because there was no way that a Black collective could own this much of fertile land. I mean, this was very arable farmland along the Atlantic coast. And so of course, that couldn't be in Black hands. And so there was a lot of manipulation and schemes at the that was led by the federal government to dismantle the RNA from the inside out.
One other thing about the RNA, the RNA, Ruth asks, RNA stands for Republic of New Africa. And you maybe said this and maybe it glossed over me, but their first congressional meeting was here in Detroit. So boom. A lot of the original organizers were Detroiters. So I just wanted to lift that up, as you know.
And Chokwe Lumumba, Chokwe Lumumba, native Detroiter, was very critical to the founding of the RNA, who then became the Mississippi, or the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. And then, of course, we think that he was assassinated years back due to his work historically with the RNA and building self-reliant Black communities, particularly in Jackson. And I also want to lift up how free the land is the motto, or is where the Black agrarian motto comes from. The RNA motto of free the land is where we get it from, which is a very popular saying.
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad Farms is also another example. The Nation of Islam is an Islamic religious organization founded in Detroit, Michigan in 1930. Under Elijah Muhammad's leadership, the Nation of Islam brought a message of self-reliance, independence, and respect to Black people who were often confined to poor inner city neighborhoods due to racial discrimination under systemic white supremacy. And so in 1968, the Nation of Islam purchased the land to what became the Muhammad Farms on 3,800 acres in Georgia. And due to financial pressures, they lost it and repurchased a portion of it in 1994. And Elijah Muhammad often said, if you want to feed yourselves, you should go to the farm. That is where people find food. Don't be ashamed to go and do for yourselves, raising food. If we are to be a nation and a strong nation, we must go to the farm to feed our stomachs. And so this idea of centering land in our liberation is a very traditional, ancestral, a very well-exposed concept that it's not new to urban agriculture or even modern day Black liberation movements.
Can I just say one thing about, and because we know that the Muhammad's first mosque was here in Detroit, so you know, just got to put my shout out there.
Of course, please do. Please do, yes.
And I do believe they have a farm here in Michigan as well as Atlanta.
Yeah, so I've heard that. I don't know if it's still in operation. I know they did at one point in time. I believe it was in Milan County, which is not too far from Detroit, one of the countrysides of Southeast Michigan. But I really haven't heard any, I don't know a lot of history about that piece of land, and I don't know if it's still in operation.
Yeah. If they are, we need to connect with them like ASAP.
Of course, right, right. Actually, so I'm connected to Black farmers, the Southeast Michigan Producers Association, and other Black farmers in rural Southeast Michigan. And I'll drop the note, hey, do you know about the history of Muhammad farms? And no one seems to, it doesn't get any traction generally. So yeah, we can keep digging because I know someone has some information. That history is out there. We just have to find that person who can tell us those stories.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever saw, have you ever seen Baba Jaman speak on the history of Betty Shabazz being here and like the whole history of Nation of Islam? Is really super interesting, but you know, I see y'all in the track, y'all Detroit people. I had to big up it, you know.
Okay, keep it moving. Mayor Young's family migrated to Detroit in 1923 from Alabama. And I think Mayor Coleman Young is one of the historical leaders that we praise as, you know, Detroit's Black mayor that has done a lot for the Black community here. And so wanting to address vacancy in the city and rising food prices, he instituted the Farm-A-Lot program in the 1980s, which gave gardeners a lease on the property, seeds, and tilling support, as well as offering classes at neighborhood city halls. And an unexpected result of the program was the cooperation and unity that developed in its participants. In 1974, 1 year before this article that's in the center right here was printed, 525 lots were farmed. And in 1975, they were offering up 1,000 lots for the program. And the program states that the average lot was farmed by 6 people and claimed to have 3,000 city farmers in their ranks. So the Farm-A-Lot program is a really huge stepping stone in building up the urban ag movement here in Detroit before it became so popular and really became this popular trend on a national level. T, you have something else to add here?
No, I mean, they were doing, if you're familiar with the Gardener Resource Program, they were doing really similar things. And I think when I first joined kind of this movement, I think you and I were, you know, kind of joining at the same time. And I'll just say, like, it was, there was not a lot of attention put on Black urban farmers, and the news articles and things. And so, like, when I began to research and understand like the Farm-A-Lot program and the history of the leadership with Coleman Young in this arena, because he was coming from a farming background, it was mind blowing. And the things that were that we were doing today, you know, giving out seeds and plants and helping people access land and doing community classes, were all happening for very long in Detroit prior to even prior to the Garden Resource Program coming. And so just and in fact, the Garden Resource Program kind of stepped in to take on these services when Detroit was at a point where it was losing funding for this work, you know. So
Mhm. Right.
yeah.
Thanks for that. Okay, moving along. So the 1976 USDA Urban Gardener Program was another popular program. T, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I think this is the point where, you know, cities were beginning to get federal kind of more funding for urban gardening, right? So and
Mhm.
this is a program with MSU that proceeds today, the 4-H Center. If you want to go to the next slide, you can see if you guys, some people may remember the 4-H Center that was open right on Gratiot and McClellan. In fact, when I around 2010, they used to have a large community garden there, and we did a lot of classes out of the 4-H Center there. Um, if you want to go one more slide, if you guys also know, in the bottom left-hand corner, that's Cornelius. He sells blueberries at the market to this day. But he was the first farmer at the 4-H Center over on Gratiot. That 4-H Center was the first certified organic farm in Detroit. He also had a farm in Vandalia, Michigan, that kind of backed some of his produce going to market. But Cornelius is still in network. You probably have seen him at the market here and there. Just wanted to, you know, give a shout out to him and his work in this movement here in Detroit.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for that, T. And he also continues to farm his family's land in Cassopolis, Michigan. He's one of the first Black farmers I connected with when I moved here, and I was learning about Black farmers' needs around technical assistance within the state. And yeah, he has a number of properties that he grows on, and he always comes to Detroit to sell his blueberries. He has some of the best blueberries I've ever tasted.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so he's
I've
a
seen you at
very
the
strong
market just
filler.
nibbling on his blueberries.
Right. Yeah, me too. I have him in the freezer. So he's a very strong pillar in the Black farming community, who's been doing this work since he was in diapers, literally.
Yeah. Yep. Him and his wife, Leslie, I'm not sure if they're still together, but they both farm there. And I think what's also interesting about this slide is um and I don't know how much I can speak to it, but there's some farming communities in Michigan, some Black farming communities in Michigan that really followed that trail of the Underground Railroad. I don't
Mhm.
know if you have a lot of that history from your work with the from your work in kind of the periphery of Detroit, but I think that's something interesting, and maybe someone in the chat has it. I'll pay attention.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to learn more about that.
Hmm.
Some of the farmers that are located right outside of South Detroit, like Milan County and Belleville, Monroe, they talk a little about how certain areas in the countryside were key locations in the Underground Railroad, where folks hid out and coincidentally, those are thriving areas for Black farmers in the countryside. That they found refuge there and they stayed there to build their farm businesses. But I don't know a lot of details about how that came to be and how those underground railroad locations morphed into farm businesses. And so yeah, we have a lot of histories and stories to recover.
So me and we're gonna have coffee. We're gonna fill in that blank right there.
Right. Right.
There's a
Right.
couple questions in the chat, but let's see. Does anyone have history of Black farmers just over the river in Canada? Um,
Mm.
And hey, let's make today Cornelius Williams Day. What's today? The night, the 20th. They're in the
Aw.
chat like he needs a day. He actually still farming in Detroit.
Mhm.
Great guy. I know he does a lot of work with DBCFSN. Um, but we can go to the next slide. I think I'm trying to remember what's after him because there's a few folks. Oh yeah, Gerald Hairston. You may have heard of him. He was a dynamic organizer here in the city. So you he worked with Genesis Hope over there on the Boulevard, and where's Genesis Hope? The Boulevard and Grand Boulevard and
It's the
Mac, I
Boulevard
think.
and Mac.
Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you. I was like,
Yeah.
who is that? Mama Hanifa? I was like,
Yes.
Matt. And I think Mama Hanifa, you worked at that garden. I don't know. I know you played a role in that garden. If you want to speak to it a little bit, I don't know, but he also played a role at the Gracely Bog. You said there were some Boggs folks on the line. Um, he was a master organizer in the 90s around gardening, Detroit Summer. So, you guys know Kabibi at the Food Policy Council, right? She was a kid in Detroit Summer at that time. And he helped to form the Detroit Agriculture Network from these different organizations that he was a part of in farming. Um, and and um, and so I have one more slide about the gardening angels, but we just want to honor his contribution to the work that we're doing today. He's celebrated in a number of ways throughout the city. Just wanted to make sure we kind of say his name, as one of the ancestors to his work.
Mm. Thanks for that, T. Mama Hanifa.
No, I didn't really work with the garden, but I did know Gerald. I knew him and I knew of his work with the elders, but I didn't necessarily have a role in the garden at Genesis.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I wasn't sure about that. But do you have any words about Gerald that you remember?
He was just a phenomenal person. Just, I mean, just indefatigable. His energy, his dedication to gardening and to teaching and working with the elders. And that's what I really remember about Gerald was his work with the gardening angels. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was just really awesome. And I do recall um, the Detroit Summer Youth and how they also were connected to the Gardening Angels because they were learning gardening. And I think they were learning gardening and murals in the community. So it was just that intergenerational kind of relationship that I think was so powerful and so necessary. And several of those young people who participated in Detroit Summer were the ones who developed the Bog School.
Mm.
Yeah, it was really powerful. And I even see one of the teachers, Jacinda Bowman, who is a middle school social studies teacher. So, yeah.
Nice. Hey, Jacinda, if you're on the line. And then I saw Ashley put in the comments, Mr. Mills and Mr. Ribron. Just want to shout out those names of folks who, were doing this work before us. I love this slide because the Gardening Angels are they were a group of elders in the community that believed in urban agriculture. They would invite young people to their gardens to kind of impart that wisdom to them. And I always just want to just read this quote because I just think it's beautiful. So Nina Pruitt, she's 97 in this slide. She says, keep things beautiful, love your yard, love your family, love your community, and love yourself. Learn to appreciate simple things. take pride in what you do have, especially those things you have the ability to manage. And I love that because I think that point right there, the things that you have the ability to manage speaks to it speaks to that self-reliancy piece that a lot of us that a lot of us are still talking about today, food sovereignty, um uh things that are in under our control. So anyway, I just wanted to shout out Miss Clark and sorry, Miss Neal in the picture here as well. So so yeah, you do we have one or two more slides?
Yeah. The uprooting racism, planting justice process here in Detroit emerged out of the space to challenge white people who are taking up a lot of space in the food justice and urban ag movements here. And I'm sure there are people here that know much more about the origin of this process and how it began to be built out. I'm sure you know much more than I do, so I'll hand over the mic to anyone who wants to talk about that.
I mean, I was involved in that the steering committee for uprooting racism, planning justice, and I think that was really driven out of what I mentioned when I first kind of jumped on the food scene in 2010, and where I mentioned we just saw um, a lot of not a lot of attention being given to black farmers in the way that it was given to white farmers. So urban farming in Detroit, when you looked at the news or newspaper articles, it was predominantly you would see white faces, which is like odd because you're in a black city, right? You're in a 85-90% black city at that point. um, and our stories were just not being told, and we this group came together to kind of digest why was that happening, across sectors. How did race impact the food system? And what I found looking back in retrospect, that was happening all across the nation, where I think it was a product of, i mentioned um, I mentioned, there began to be more funding um, available for urban farming. And I think just kind of by nature, some of the folks who were able to grab hold of that funding um, were able to speak the language of the funders, right? And so they oftentimes got into positions of power um, that weren't necessarily representative of the community, and that was happening across the nation. And so many groups began to form to try to figure out why we had this inequality within this kind of what was considered a newer movement at the time, urban agriculture. And I think I'm so happy Mama Hanifa just jumped on the call on the line, because it was conversations with you, Hanifa, that really helped me to understand like the longer history, because I was just coming on the scene relatively new, and I wasn't understanding why Black faces weren't being highlighted in the same way. And I went to do some research, and I think conversations with you, and then you challenged me to do a presentation on the history of Black farming in the city, and it helped me to uncover a lot of information, and to kind of help document it and keep that in our memories. So um, sending you a shout out.
I
So
remember that presentation and it was awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that.
thank you. Thank you for holding some of that history and keeping that for us all. So anyway, I think is there anything else you wanted to say about this particular slide? But just kind of realizing that um, you know folks who have power in communities should be the people that are in those communities and living in those communities, right? So
Right. Yep. And so that is a beautiful segue to how the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network came to be, which was established in 2009 by 2006 to address food insecurity in the city and really audaciously and unapologetically demonstrate how the movement should be led by those most impacted and those who had more to gain from the movement, being Black people, Detroit being a majority Black city. And so observing that key players in the local urban ag movement were young, well-intentioned white people, had way too much power and control. And so Baba Malika Kini, Mama Hanifa Ajuman, Mama Charity Hicks, all of these folks came together to create the organization that really became a national model for urban agriculture and food justice in Black communities. Leah Penniman's Soul Fire Farm, the Black Church Food Security Network in Baltimore, both based their organizational structures off of DBCFSN. And so the organization has been a source of inspiration nationally and internationally for food sovereignty and food justice efforts. And so it's an honor. Thank you, Mama Honey, for joining us. It's an honor to be in community with you all that stewarded this process prior to it becoming really sexy and trendy, because that was the only way we were actually going to achieve any socially transformative change, right? And I'm happy to hand over the mic to you, Mama Hanifa, as one of the co-founders, if you wanted to say anything about it, something that I missed perhaps.
Well, I guess the only thing that I would like to add, it's always important to center our young people in this work. And the idea of DBCFSN actually was a seed that was planted in the work that we were doing at a small African-centered school here in the city of Detroit in Soroma Institute. And food security was always a part of the school's curriculum. And every teacher, no matter what discipline you taught, at least one lesson a week had to focus on some aspect of the food system. And as Mama Shakara has said, in 2006, DBCFSN was born, but it was born out of us understanding that there was a problem, that there was a challenge that needed to be addressed. And rather than looking outside ourselves, we began to have a series of conversations, community people, community activists, teachers, and just community members in general. And out of that grew the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. But again, that seed was germinated at Soroma Institute. We had a school garden. We were able to take the theory and to put it into practice, and all classrooms were required to work in the garden with the children. And it was just wonderful. And out of that also grew the, first it was called the Shamba Garden Club, which was the after school program that built upon the work that the children were doing during the regular school day. And from the Shamba Garden Club came the Food Warriors, which we now, the Food Warriors, which is the youth development program that continues within the organization.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful history. Thanks for sharing that, Mama Hanifa. We really appreciate that. And one of the key acts that DBCFSN did was stewarding the development of the Detroit Food Policy Council, because at the time, the city of Detroit didn't have a comprehensive food security policy, and members of DBCFSN put pressure on local city council to develop a food security policy. and they were appointed the job of doing so. And so the organization DBCFSN played a huge role in the development of this really important local political institution that now focuses on developing not only food security policies within the city, but anything dealing with food systems generally. And so it was established in 2009 by unanimous approval by the Detroit City Council, and it implements and monitors and as an advisory board consisting of 23 members, including 15 representatives from various sectors of the food system, 4 at-large representatives, 1 youth representative, and 3 governmental representatives, 1 from each of the mayor's office, the city council, and the Department of Health and Wellness Promotion. And so I think this is another key pillar in our community that's been fighting for food justice as well, that DBCFSN played a huge role in. And I also want to uplift Oakland Avenue Urban Farm, which is a beautiful, beautiful space in the North End. Founded, I believe, not too long after DBCFSN was founded. And it's a program of the North End Christian Community Development Corporation. And it's a nonprofit community-based organization dedicated to cultivating healthy food, sustainable economies, and active cultural environments. And so they operate a farmers markets. They operate a farmers market in their space in the North End every Saturday, I think from like June to September or October. They also serve as a food distribution site. Mama Jerry Hebron is another co-founder of the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund. Their space is very artistic. It serves as an artist space, a community gathering space. They do fundraisers. Check out their Afro Jam, delicious. So they're another key pillar in the Black agrarian movement here in Detroit. Ohana Gardens is another example, which was founded by Keith and Diane Hoy of Highland Park, Michigan. Although they've been growing food for over 10 years, they learned about how to grow or make their own farm business from Will Allen, who was a famous farm or is a famous farm educator through his former organization called Growing Power. And they took his 5-month program called Commercial Urban Agriculture in 2015 and have since been growing microgreens amongst other foods in their at their farm in Highland Park. And Feed 'em Freedom Growers is another phenomenal example. I think we all know Mama Myrtle and Baba Wayne, who founded the organization around 2010 to show people that you can have something sustainable that you built with your own hands. And they also have a very youth-centered approach. They infuse urban ag with art, musical and visual arts in particular, and community building. Again, they have a beautiful space that serves as a community building site where meetings and festivals happen. They're one of the few farms that I see growing fruit trees in the city. So these are some examples, and there are many, many more. I don't want to leave out anyone in the presentation, but in the interest of time, I'm just highlighting these various examples of Black agrarian formations that have grown over the years and what they've contributed to our community. And last and surely not least is the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund that emerged just last year after some years of contemplating what giving support to Black farmers who were trying to attain land, whether it was by owning land or leasing land in the city of Detroit, would look like. 3 organizations came together: Keep Growing Detroit, DBCFSN, and Oakland Avenue Urban Farm came together to launch a campaign last year for Juneteenth. And we had the goal of raising $5,000, and shockingly, we were able to raise over $65,000 over the span of a few months, which we weren't completely expecting at all. And we were able to award 30 Black farmers and gardeners in the city grants to purchase land. And here's a map of the awardees and their growing spaces that span the city. And this is our logo that was created by Mama Erin Bevel. Thank you. And we wanted to end on the video that GMAC, who's an MC in the city, created to accompany our campaign, and has been a really beautiful way for us to get the word out. So T, do you think we can go to the video now, or should we wait until after?
You want to go, we can go to the video and then say we'll have about 10 minutes for questions at the end. So if you have questions, you want to stick around. I think you might have to click something to be able to hear, for them to be able to hear the video. Let's see.
Okay. Well, so I think you can hear it as long as I keep my volume. Like if you can hear my voice, you can hear the video if I bring it up on my browser.
Okay, great.
We shall see.
Yes, Angela, we need to get Highland Park on that map.
Housing Act the night. Can y'all hear that?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
34 created subsidized mortgages in the war.
I'm gonna start it over.
Thank you.
Shout out to the Detroit Black Farm and Land Fund. GMAC. The Housing Act of 1934 created subsidized mortgages and awarded them to people non-black. The racist developers built a wall on 8 Mile and Birdwood to keep the all-white developments on attack. The same act created rental assistance mainly for blacks. The homeowners loan corp created redlining maps to determine where they could and couldn't lend at. Underclass planning can't defend that. Deliberately helped my kin back out 120 billion. My people saw 2% toward ownership. This government assisting on paying rent. The 30s to the 60s, a sort of mortgage monopoly. Undeveloped the blacks, leaving whites wealthy with property. Things have a reason in the season, it's a new day. Black farmer land for restoring justice a new way. Exploring access, restoring blackness to farming like compost. Breaking down the barriers and bringing what was far close. Black woman led and ran, raised over 50 grand in less than a month span. Got a plan, need some land to work your black hand. Self-sufficiency, abundance, we bringing it back, fam. Like
we will post more information, in particular our application for black farmers here in Detroit who are looking to own their land that they're growing up. We're excited to hear from you and to support you in this endeavor.
Hold on. I think we got GMAC in the house. Hey, GMAC, thanks so much for putting that down. That was so awesome. Sending a universal clap, 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 clap.
Yes, the bars are prophetic.
My goodness. My goodness.
And I wanted to I forgot to mention how the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, of course, is not a one-year stint. We are moving on. Next year, we have the goal of raising even more money to support even more farmers and gardeners in the city. And so we'll be launching a campaign again. I think we decided for Juneteenth again this year. And so please stay tuned for that, and plug in however you see fit.
All right. Well, with that, I want to say thank you so much, Shakira. I will stay around for about 10 more minutes for questions. If there's anyone who you can feel free that now that we're done presenting, we can, if you want to unmute and ask a question, or if you have a comment on anything you saw, or you have things that you want to add to the conversation. Me and Shakira were talking about it. We said, we're always growing and learning, and we're like, now we're co-developing this. I'm looking you in your eyes because we're co-developing this PowerPoint here.
Share knowledge, and I'm open to sharing the PowerPoint with anyone who would like. You can email me and I can send it to you, or T, I don't know if it makes sense for you to send to all the participants, but this is our community knowledge. I don't own the knowledge because I put together the PowerPoint. Like, it's been crowdsourced from multiple people over the years. And the more we can share this information, the closer we are getting to where we need to be, right, as a community. So more than happy to share the information.
Awesome. So I can share that out if you're okay with that. Thank you so much. A lot of people saying great presentation, and thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. If there's anyone who'd like to unmute or has questions from the presentation or things to add, feel free to do that now and give people a minute to feel comfortable and want to jump in. Is that Jacinda from Jacinda? Are you from Boggs? I heard Mama Hanifa say your name.
Yeah, I'm a teacher at Boggs.
Nice, nice.
Mhm.
Yeah, so many amazing elders. I'm just hearing Sam has a question here, maybe a silly question, but if anyone knows, will this whole recording be available later to share? Yes, you can definitely we'll definitely have the recording available. It's streaming live, so it'll be on the Detroit Black Farmer Fund land page on Facebook. And I'll also upload it to YouTube and make sure to put it out there. Yep. And we're always we're launching a formal like GoFundMe campaign in June for the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund. You can always donate to Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund via Cash App right now if you are so inclined at # Detroit Black Farmer. I can put it in the link if you want to contribute in that way. Sam, I just saw you say something about donation. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Good. How are you this morning or this afternoon?
Good.
Trying to get this information. Your window leak.
Yep. About the top part where the trees
I think that might be where they might need to put a bead of caulk or something across the top of that gutter.
Oh, excuse me, sir. We can hear your conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
No
thought y'all had
problem.
me on mute.
No, did you have a question? I thought you unmuted because you had a question.
No, I had a statement. I did really appreciate this conversation, and and I would like to add that there are still Muslim farmers in Mississippi. Not only Muslim farmers, but I'm trying to think of this brother's name that was activist down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. His son owns some property that they've been trying to steal from him down in Mississippi. So I'm just saying that, you know, we do have issues as far as holding on to land and keeping it. A lot of our land that we had in our family was sold due to ignorance. You know, we didn't appreciate it. We move up north and we forget about what was going on down there, you know, with our folks. And I'm 69 this year. And when I first, as far back as I can remember, we always had a garden in our backyard, except for when we was in the Black Bottom. And when we were in the Black Bottom, we lived in the complex, but we united behind the complex, the elders and the children and everyone, and they would do their crafts, teach the children, you know, and just have events, you know, and this was back in the early 50s, you know, so yeah, big up to all the Black farmers in this area. And I really appreciate you all's work.
Thank you so much. What's your name?
They call me Baba Hakeem.
Oh, thank you so much, Baba Hakeem. We appreciate you joining and saying some words there. There's a few things in the chat here. There's shout out to my Monica White's book. She's also she was a founding member of DBCFSN, maybe. I know she was on the board president for a while. But there's a book, Freedom Farmers. Yes, it's a great resource. I wanted to shout out Lisa, who mentioned Jamon Jordan. He's a historian in the area with the Black Scroll Network. He has tons of information, very valuable information. And I also just wanted to big up to Lisa because Lisa is a homeowner in Hamtramck who donated land to the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, which is, you know, just a phenomenal act of solidarity. And I just wanted to send you some appreciation for that. We do have I will circle back with you offline, but we have someone very interested in that property. Yep. So if I didn't miss,
Yeah.
someone asked earlier if there's any 4-H centers in Detroit. I believe the one on Gratiot closed, and that's been within the last 5 years. I don't, and if anybody has any other information about 4-H centers right in the city, I don't know of any. I know MSU does a lot of MSU 4-H is kind of an extension service from MSU, and they do a lot of work in the city, but I don't know about a formal 4-H center.
Yeah, I don't know of any active ones. I do know that Alkebalon Village, who actually GMAC is affiliated with very directly, received the certification to be a 4-H center years
Nice.
back, and they haven't done anything with it as of yet. I don't know if GMAC is still available or on the line to speak to that, but that is another resource potentially. I could provide his email in the chat if someone else wanted to dig deeper for that.
Nice. So it looks like the center itself in the chat, if you want to check out the center itself, was purchased by some former students from the 4-H, which went on to do Payne's Landscaping in Detroit. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, well, if there aren't any further questions, thanks so much for taking this time out of your Saturday to learn more about the history of Black farming in general and specifically in Detroit. It's a very important topic and something that we just need to keep our minds on in terms of the history, right? What was the name of the school that was mentioned? It was at Boggs, Grace Lee Boggs. So we didn't say her name, but we mentioned her school, but we didn't say her name. She was very, her and her husband, James, were very strong in the environmental movement and worked very closely with Gerald Hairston. Jacinda, if you want to say anything about Grace Lee and the school, feel free to unmute. You had a question in there about the school.
Yeah, I've been at the school for 5 years. I don't know if I'm the best person to speak about the history of the school, but yeah, James and Grace Lee Boggs were activists in the city, and they started Detroit Summer many years ago, which the founders of the Boggs School started their relationship with the Boggses through that program. Yeah, the school has been around since 2013. We just moved locations. We're a place-based school. I don't know if there's any specific questions, but yeah.
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and stop recording, but I just again want to thank you for your time. We're going to go ahead and let Mama Kira get out to the Sugar Bush this afternoon. If I can join you, I'll try to get out there too. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll try to send out the slides if you're interested into your email. Have a good day, guys. You want to do the universal unmute? Anybody want to do it with me and be corny? Goodbye.
I do.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Mama.
Bye.
Mom, Luna, come say bye.
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 Yeah, you have to say bye to you guys too every time. See everybody Sunday.
Yeah, I was gonna say, are you okay? Good.